Have you ever had a coworker who made your life feel like a living nightmare? Imagine going to work every day only to realize that the person sitting next to you is slowly turning your job into a terrifying ordeal. From unexplained incidents to spine-chilling behavior, this true story will make you question who you can really trust at work. If you think you're brave enough to uncover the darkest corners of real-life horror, subscribe to Bleeding Walls now and join us as we explore the most shocking and bone-chilling stories that will haunt you long after the video ends. I had always considered myself lucky to land a position at a reputable marketing firm in the city. The office was sleek, modern, and bustling with energy, and my co-workers, for the most part, seemed friendly. I was excited, ready to dive into my career, and eager to prove myself. Little did I know that my first year at that office would become one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and that it would all center around a single co-worker named Derek. Derek joined the company a few months before me. On the surface, he seemed charming and professional. He had a way of making small talk feel warm, and he was always eager to help new employees settle in. Initially, I appreciated his guidance. He introduced me to the office culture, explained the workflow, and even stayed late one evening to help me finish a project. It felt like I had found an ally in the office. But slowly, over time, I began to notice the cracks beneath Derek's friendly facade. The first incident that raised my suspicions seemed small at the time, almost laughable. I'd left a cup of coffee on my desk while I went to grab a file, and when I returned, it was empty. I assumed I'd spilled it, or maybe someone had accidentally knocked it over. But then it happened again, and again. At first I brushed it off as clumsiness, but when I caught Derek smirking as he walked past my desk, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Something about his expression told me this wasn't accidental. After a few weeks, Derek's behavior escalated. He began manipulating small aspects of my work, subtly sabotaging projects and leaving me to deal with the fallout. One morning, a crucial client report that I had stayed up all night preparing was missing from the shared drive. I was panicking, trying to figure out what went wrong, when Derek casually mentioned he had cleaned up the files and suggested I double-check my submission. His tone was almost teasing, and the way he looked at me made me feel watched, as though he was enjoying my growing anxiety. It didn't stop there. Emails started going missing, documents were mysteriously edited, and confidential memos would appear on my desk after I had never requested them. Every time I approached Derek about these incidents, he would shake his head and smile, claiming he had no idea what I was talking about. I began to question my own memory and judgment. Was I losing my mind, or was Derek intentionally orchestrating this chaos? One night, I stayed late to finish a presentation. The office was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I remember feeling uneasy, almost like someone was lurking just out of sight. I shook it off as exhaustion, but then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping from behind the partition where Derek's desk was located. My heart raced as I cautiously peeked over. Derek wasn't there. I checked the security cameras the next day and discovered footage of him leaving the office an hour earlier. There was no logical explanation for the tapping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been there somehow. Soon, Derek began invading my personal space in ways that were impossible to ignore. He would appear at my cubicle unannounced, hover while I worked, and comment on my habits, like the way I sipped my coffee or the order in which I completed tasks. His observations were unnervingly precise, as if he had been watching me for hours. When I tried to distance myself, he found ways to insert himself into my projects, often taking credit for my ideas and undermining me in front of supervisors. The office, which once felt like a safe place, became a prison. One particularly harrowing week, I started noticing subtle threats. Sticky notes appeared on my desk with cryptic messages. "You're next. Watch your back. Don't trust anyone." I assumed it was a prank at first, but the handwriting matched Derek's perfectly. I reported it to HR, expecting immediate action, but they dismissed it as harmless office humor. I felt helpless. The messages escalated. Some appeared on my computer screen as pop-ups, others hidden inside files I'd left open. The sense of being watched, tracked, and manipulated became suffocating. The breaking point came one Friday afternoon. Our team was working on a major campaign pitch for a high-profile client. I'd been assigned the lead, and everything depended on my presentation. Hours before the meeting, Derek helped me organize the slides. When I finally opened the file during the presentation, the content had been altered in ways that made me look incompetent. The client noticed immediately, asking questions I couldn't answer. I was mortified, my confidence shattered. Derek smiled from the back of the room, a smug, triumphant expression that chilled me to the bone. That evening, I stayed late in the office, pacing and trying to understand how one person could make me feel so powerless. I thought about resigning, but I couldn't shake the fear of what Derek might do next. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Good luck at work tomorrow. My blood ran cold. I realized then that this wasn't just about office rivalry or childish pranks. Derek had a deeper, more sinister intent. I began keeping a journal, documenting every incident, every odd behavior, every note, every email. The pattern was undeniable. Derek was meticulous, calculating, and obsessed with controlling my life at work. I started installing small cameras and recording devices at my desk, hoping to catch evidence. The tension became unbearable. I couldn't eat properly, I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly on edge. The office, once a place of ambition and excitement, had transformed into a haunted space where every shadow felt like a threat. Then, one night, something happened that made my terror real. I was working late, and the office was empty except for the faint hum of computers. I heard the distinct sound of typing coming from my workstation, even though I was the only one there. The cursor on my screen moved on its own, opening files, typing words I didn't recognize. I froze. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath visible in the cold air, and then I heard his voice, low, chilling, right behind me. "You really thought you could escape me?" I spun around. No one was there. My hands shook. My heart raced. I shut down my computer and fled the office, locking the door behind me. I never stayed late alone again. The next day, I reported the incident to HR and higher management, presenting the evidence I'd painstakingly collected. Derek was confronted and eventually let go. But the damage was done. The months of psychological torment had left scars that didn't heal overnight. Even after he left, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Small things would go missing, emails would vanish, and sometimes I would feel an inexplicable chill in the office. I realized that some people aren't just difficult co-workers. They are predators, and their obsession can linger long after they are gone. The experience taught me to trust my instincts, to document suspicious behavior, and, most importantly, to never underestimate the quiet danger of someone who knows exactly how to make your life a living nightmare. Looking back now, I understand that Derek wasn't just a co-worker. He was a master manipulator, a psychological tormentor who thrived on fear and control. My job, once a place of growth and opportunity, became a crucible of terror. But surviving it taught me resilience, awareness, and the chilling reality that sometimes horror isn't found in haunted houses or ghost stories. It hides in plain sight, in the office, in the people we think we can trust. To this day, whenever I hear the faint tapping of a keyboard or notice a shadow lingering longer than it should, I can't help but remember Derek. And I warn anyone entering the professional world. Some co-workers aren't just difficult. They are nightmares waiting to unfold. I'd always considered the night shift at the city's data center to be quiet and uneventful. Most people avoided it, preferring the regular 9-to-5 grind. But I liked the solitude. The hum of servers, the soft blinking of lights, and the near silence created a strange comfort, a rhythm that let me focus without distraction. That was until a new coworker named Marcus joined our team. Marcus seemed ordinary at first. He was tall, lanky, and quiet, almost painfully reserved. He didn't engage in small talk and spent most of his time at his workstation, headphones on, typing furiously. Most of us barely noticed him. I didn't either, until the night I first realized something was very wrong. It started with subtle things. Files I had saved on the network would be moved or renamed, often with slightly mocking titles. My emails were opened before I even sent them, leaving me wondering how someone could intercept them. I initially chalked it up to glitches, until I saw Marcus watching me from across the room, his eyes unblinking, tracking my every move. When I looked up, he would smile faintly and look away, pretending nothing had happened. One night, I stayed late to finish some urgent reports. The office was nearly empty, the only sounds the hum of machines and my own typing. That's when I heard the first whisper. At first, I thought it was the building's ventilation system, but the whisper grew clearer, forming words that chilled me to the bone. "You shouldn't be here alone." I froze, my hands hovering above the keyboard. The room was empty, yet the voice persisted, soft and deliberate. From that night on, Marcus's behavior escalated. He would appear unexpectedly behind me, standing silently until I noticed him. He never spoke, never moved, but the sense of his presence alone was terrifying. Personal items on my desk started disappearing, my water bottle, my notebook, even my phone. Sometimes they would reappear in strange places, like inside the server racks or on the other side of the room. When I asked him about it, he would just smile, tilt his head, and walk away. The real nightmare began when I started receiving messages on my computer. At first, they seemed like harmless warnings. Be careful. Watch your back. Not everyone is who they seem. But soon, they became more sinister, appearing as pop-ups while I worked, sometimes even typed in my own documents without my consent. The words seemed to crawl across the screen, leaving me panicked and paranoid. I tried reporting it to HR, but they dismissed it as a technical glitch. No one believed me. Then came the night I found evidence I couldn't ignore. I had installed a small camera on my desk to monitor the office while I stepped out for a break. Reviewing the footage, I saw Marcus lurking around my workspace, crouching behind chairs and typing on my computer while I wasn't there. But the strangest part was the end of the footage. Marcus standing perfectly still, staring directly at the camera. His expression was blank, but there was something profoundly sinister in his eyes, a knowing that sent shivers down my spine. After that, I started noticing him in impossible places. I would be in the break room, only to turn around and see him standing silently in the server room hallway. I would check the security cameras, and there he would be, standing in the same spot, staring. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of him in the reflections of glass doors or monitors, always watching, always present. The office, once a place of order and routine, became a labyrinth of paranoia. One evening, while working late, I heard a loud bang from the server room. My heart raced as I cautiously approached. The door was ajar, and inside, I saw Marcus crouched among the servers, wires dangling and monitors displaying my private emails. I demanded to know what he was doing. He looked up, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't have stayed late. This is my shift." From that moment, every night became a battle for my sanity. Marcus's stalking intensified. He would leave notes on my desk. "I see you. You can't hide. We are the same now." He started manipulating the security system, locking doors and turning off cameras at will. I was trapped in the office, constantly watched, constantly terrorized. Sleep was impossible, and I began to dread every shift. One night, I decided to confront him. I stayed after everyone else had left, determined to put an end to the harassment. I found him in the server room, standing silently in the shadows. I asked him why he was doing this. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, and the temperature dropped sharply. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the room itself had turned hostile. Then he whispered something I will never forget. "You belong here now, with me, forever." I ran, never looking back, and reported the incident to management with the security footage as evidence. Marcus was terminated immediately, but the fear didn't leave me. Even after he was gone, I could feel his presence lingering in the office. The faint tapping of keyboards, shadows that seemed to move, the chilling feeling of being watched. The night shift, once my sanctuary, became a haunting reminder of that terrifying period. It took months to recover from the psychological torment. I sought therapy, spoke to colleagues, and gradually regained my confidence. But the experience left me forever changed. I learned that some coworkers are more than just difficult. They are predators, capable of manipulating and terrorizing those around them in ways that defy logic. Even now, whenever I work late or hear faint sounds in an empty office, I can't help but remember Marcus and the nights I spent under his watchful gaze. Horror doesn't always lurk in dark alleys or abandoned houses. Sometimes it sits silently beside you, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When I first moved into my new apartment, I thought I had finally found a peaceful place to live. It was an older building, tucked away in a quiet part of the city, with a creaky charm that appealed to me. The rent was affordable, the neighbors seemed friendly, and the location was perfect. But within weeks of moving in, I realized that something about the building, and particularly the apartment across the hall, was deeply wrong. The apartment across from mine had been vacant for months before I moved in. At first, I didn't think much of it. Occasionally, I would notice flickering lights or shadows moving behind the curtains, but I assumed it was someone who had moved in without updating their lease or perhaps maintenance workers. That assumption ended quickly. One night, I was returning home after a long day at work when I heard faint noises coming from the empty apartment. At first, it was just a low hum, almost like a whisper carried through the walls. I paused, straining to listen. The whispering grew clearer, forming words I couldn't quite make out. I knocked on the door to check if anyone was inside, but there was no answer. The door itself was locked, yet the noises persisted. Over the next few days, strange things began happening in my own apartment. Objects would shift slightly, as if someone had touched them. My personal items disappeared and reappeared in odd places. Doors that I had locked would be unlocked when I returned. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence or forgetfulness, but then I started seeing glimpses of a figure, tall, shadowy, and impossible to identify, standing across the hall, staring directly at my door. The more I observed, the more I realized that the figure was always there, lurking in the apartment across from mine. During the day, the windows were dark, and no one seemed to be living there. At night, however, the shadows moved as if alive. One evening, I caught a brief glimpse of a face pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless, eyes hollow and staring straight at me. I froze, my heart pounding, and when I blinked, the figure was gone. The disturbances escalated. Late at night, I would hear footsteps pacing across the empty apartment, heavy thuds that shook the floor. Whispers became more distinct, calling my name in low, chilling tones. Sometimes I would wake to find messages scratched into my walls or smeared across my mirrors. "I see you. Don't look away. You can't escape." I started locking every door and window, but it seemed useless. The presence across the hall ignored barriers. I tried speaking to neighbors about the strange occurrences. They were dismissive, some suggesting I was imagining things or stressed from work. But one elderly tenant, Mrs. Harlow, warned me. "That apartment has a dark history," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "No one has lived there for long. People hear voices, see shadows. Some say it's cursed." I dismissed her at first, but the evidence was mounting too quickly to ignore. One night, I decided to confront the apartment across the hall. I waited until after midnight, gathered my courage, and knocked firmly on the door. Silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open on its own. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The apartment was empty, or so it seemed. Dust covered the floors, and the air was stale and cold. Yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I moved forward, and that's when I saw them, handprints on the walls, smudged and deep, as if someone or something had pressed against them recently. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing through the empty rooms. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. My flashlight flickered, casting moving shadows that seemed to close in on me from all directions. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. I was trapped. My hands shook as I tried to open it, the whispers turning into guttural voices that seemed to come from inside my own head. I finally managed to break free and ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, felt like it was part of the presence watching me. Over the next few weeks, the activity worsened. I began seeing the figure in reflections, catching glimpses out of the corner of my eye. The whispers grew more coherent. "You can't leave. This is mine now. Forever." I realized that the apartment across the hall wasn't just haunted. It was alive in a way I couldn't comprehend. I tried moving out, but every time I packed a bag or arranged for a new lease, something would prevent me. My keys would disappear, my car would fail to start, and occasionally I would see that shadowy figure standing just outside my door, silently observing. I felt powerless, caught in a nightmare that refused to end. One night, in desperation, I called a paranormal investigator. They came with equipment, cameras, and protective charms. They spent hours in both apartments, but left shaken and pale. "It's intelligent," the investigator said, "and malevolent. It knows you're here. It's feeding on fear." They recommended leaving immediately, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence would follow me. Eventually, I did move out, taking only a few belongings and leaving the rest behind. But the nightmare didn't end. The apartment across the hall remained vacant, yet the whispers haunted me in my new home. Sometimes I hear faint tapping or a soft voice calling my name late at night, and I wonder if it's truly gone, or if it simply follows those who have witnessed it. To this day, I warn anyone looking for a quiet apartment. Some places hold more than memories within their walls. Some places watch, wait, and feed on the living. The apartment across the hall wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, patient, cunning, and eternally hungry. Even now, years later, whenever I hear a faint knock or see a shadow where none should exist, I remember the nights I spent across the hall from that cursed apartment. Horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits silently, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to make its presence known. And once it notices you, it never truly lets go. I had always loved traveling and staying in unique places, which is why I started booking Airbnb rentals for my trips. I preferred the privacy and the charm of staying in someone's home rather than in personal hotels. But one stay changed my perspective forever. What was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. I had booked a small cabin in a remote town, nestled near the edge of a forest. The listing was perfect, rustic yet cozy with large windows and a fireplace. The host, Mr. Lang, seemed friendly over messages, quick to answer questions and eager to ensure I had everything I needed. When I arrived, I was charmed by the quaint exterior, the smell of pine, and the peaceful silence surrounding the property. Little did I know that the real horror would come from someone I wasn't expecting at all. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, settled in, and enjoyed the quiet. But as I lay in bed, I thought I heard faint footsteps outside the cabin. I assumed it was an animal and ignored it. The next morning I discovered small scratches on the porch railing and footprints in the dirt that led from the woods directly to the cabin. The footprints looked human, but there was no sign of anyone living nearby. I mentioned it to Mr. Lang, who shrugged and said it was probably just local wildlife. That evening, the unease escalated. I was cooking dinner when I heard a knock on the door, sharp and deliberate. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the window, no one was there. Thinking it was a prank, I ignored it. But the knocks continued, always at irregular intervals. Sometimes 3 knocks, sometimes 6. They didn't follow a pattern, but they felt deliberate, as if someone was taunting me. On the second night, I awoke to a whispering sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it was coming from inside the cabin. Soft, unintelligible murmurs floated through the room, growing louder and more distinct. I turned on the lights and checked every corner, but the cabin was empty. My heart raced as I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but when I looked at the window, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the woods, staring directly at the cabin. I blinked, and it was gone. The following day, I noticed more disturbing signs. Objects in the cabin had shifted. My backpack was on the floor instead of the table, and my water bottle was missing for a few minutes before reappearing on the kitchen counter. I tried to rationalize everything, blaming stress and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I was not alone. That night, the horror intensified. I was lying in bed when I heard the creak of the floorboards outside the bedroom door. Slowly, I got up and approached the door, my hands trembling. The door was locked, yet the creaking continued, moving closer. I could hear breathing, slow, deliberate, and heavy. My panic escalated, and I grabbed a chair to barricade the door. The noises stopped as suddenly as they began. My hands were shaking and my mind raced. Determined to escape the nightmare, I decided to contact Mr. Lang. I sent him multiple messages asking if anyone else had access to the cabin. He assured me that no one did and that the place was secure, but when I received his final message, my blood ran cold. "Don't worry, you're not alone." There was no signature, no indication it was from him, but I knew immediately that someone or something had been inside. I spent the next night in a state of terror. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. I could hear whispers through the walls, coming from all directions. At one point, I saw a handprint appear on the glass door, smeared and unnatural, even though I was certain no one was outside. I tried to leave, but the path through the forest seemed impossibly long, almost as if the woods themselves had shifted to trap me. By the third night, the presence was undeniable. I could feel it watching me, stalking me, moving silently through the cabin. At one point, I woke to find my bed slightly pressed down, as if someone had been lying next to me. The whispers had become words, clear and deliberate. "You can't leave. Stay with me. Forever." I couldn't move. My fear was paralyzing, and I realized I was in a fight for my sanity. On my final night, the cabin became a full-blown nightmare. I could hear footsteps pacing the floor, objects flying across the room, and doors slamming shut with terrifying force. The figure from the woods appeared at the window, now fully visible, a tall, pale silhouette with hollow eyes staring straight at me. My heart raced, my mind screamed, and I finally made a desperate decision. I grabbed my keys and phone and ran into the forest, not caring where I went, only that I had to escape. I ran for what felt like hours, the shadow always just behind me, keeping pace effortlessly. Eventually, I stumbled onto a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver called the police, and I returned to the cabin the next day with authorities. But when we arrived, the place was empty. No footprints, no evidence of the figure, nothing. It was as if the cabin had swallowed everything that had happened, erasing all traces of the nightmare. I never stayed in another Airbnb again. The images, the whispers, the feeling of being hunted have stayed with me for years. I often wake in the middle of the night, feeling the presence lurking just outside, wondering if it truly let me go or if it's waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to enter its domain. That cabin taught me a lesson about trust and the unknown. Horror doesn't always live in stories or movies. It can hide in the most mundane places, waiting for the right moment to strike. And sometimes, the people or entities you think are hosts can become predators, turning what should have been a peaceful getaway into a waking nightmare. Even now, I avoid quiet cabins, empty streets at night, and anything that reminds me of that Airbnb. The fear is embedded in my memory, a constant reminder that some places are alive in ways we cannot understand, and some presences never truly leave, even when you think you've escaped. I'd always enjoyed working in a big corporate office downtown. The building was impressive, glass walls, polished floors, and a sense of prestige that made me proud to be part of the team. Most days were uneventful, filled with emails, meetings, and the usual office chatter. But one project changed everything and turned my workplace into a place I could never feel safe again. It all began when I was assigned to a late-night project requiring minimal distraction. The office was usually empty after 7, except for a few security personnel and the cleaning staff. I volunteered, thinking it would be a quiet, productive night. But as soon as I settled at my desk, I felt an odd tension in the air, a kind of stillness that wasn't normal. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed someone in the office. My coworker, Stephen. He wasn't scheduled for night shifts, but he appeared out of nowhere, leaning casually against the wall. I greeted him, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking with a faint, almost cruel smile. I told myself he was joking or maybe staying late like me, but there was something about him that set my nerves on edge. Over the next hour, strange things started happening. Papers I had neatly stacked began scattering across the floor. My computer would flicker on and off, and files I had saved would vanish without explanation. I chalked it up to technical glitches, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. I kept glancing toward Stephen, but he never moved, never spoke, just stood there, observing silently. By midnight, the atmosphere had become oppressive. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long, twisting shadows across the office. I could hear faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. At first, I thought it was the HVAC system, but the whispers grew clearer, forming words. "You can't leave. This is ours now. Don't look away." I froze, unable to move, as the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then came the tapping. It started softly, like fingernails drumming against a desk, then grew louder, echoing through the office in an irregular rhythm. I turned to see the source, but nothing was there. Papers flew from drawers, and office chairs moved on their own. My heart raced as I realized I was no longer alone. The building itself seemed alive, and something malevolent had taken notice of me. I tried calling the security desk, but the phones were dead. My cell phone had no signal. Panic set in. I ran toward the exit, only to find the doors locked and unresponsive. Windows refused to open. Shadows moved independently of the flickering lights, stretching across the walls and floors, always staying just out of reach. Stephen remained where he had been, his smile widening into something unnatural, almost demonic. Hours seemed to pass as I wandered through the office, trying doors, windows, and even the elevator, which wouldn't respond. The whispers grew into voices, each one distinct, hissing threats, laughing, and calling my name. I realized with horror that the building wasn't just empty. It was feeding on fear, absorbing energy, and somehow controlling the environment around me. At one point, I found myself back at my desk, as if the office had shifted to trap me. My chair spun slowly and my keyboard typed words I didn't write. "You can't escape. We see everything." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Shadows crept along the walls, reaching for me with elongated claw-like fingers. I pressed my hands against my ears, hoping to shut out the voices, but the tapping continued, louder and more deliberate than ever. Desperate, I remembered the stairwell. I sprinted toward it, praying for an exit. As I descended, I saw Stephen following me, though he made no sound and seemed to float rather than walk. Every flight of stairs I took felt endless, looping back to the office lobby. I was trapped in a maze, a living nightmare where every exit led me back to the same place. Finally, in sheer desperation, I made a break for the loading dock at the back of the building. I threw open the door and ran into the alley, gasping for fresh air. The city lights outside felt unreal, almost like a dream. I didn't look back, but I could feel his presence behind me, even in the open air, and a lingering whisper echoed in my mind. "We'll see you again." The next day, I returned to the office with management, hoping to find an explanation. There was nothing, no sign of any supernatural presence, no misplaced items, no trace of Stephen staying late. Everything appeared perfectly normal. But I knew the truth. The office had a darkness that no one else seemed able to see, a malevolent force that fed on the fear of anyone trapped after hours. Since that night, I've refused to work late alone. I warn others to avoid the office after hours, no matter how productive it might seem. There are forces in the world, I realized, that don't announce themselves. They watch, wait, and feed in silence. My co-worker, Stephen, was just the beginning. He was the vessel, the agent through which the darkness acted. And sometimes I still hear faint tapping and whispers in my sleep, reminding me that what happened in that office never truly ends. Horror doesn't always live in abandoned buildings or haunted houses. Sometimes it hides in the most ordinary places, sitting silently in cubicles and conference rooms, waiting for the perfect victim to stay too late and discover the truth. That night taught me a lesson I will never forget. Some offices are alive, and some co-workers aren't just difficult. They're conduits for something far worse, something that thrives on fear and torment. Even now, I can't walk past that building without a shiver. Every time I see its glass walls gleaming in the night, I remember the hours I spent trapped inside, watched and tormented by a presence I can never forget. And I know, deep down, that if anyone stays after hours, they might experience the same terror I did. Some places don't just have ghosts. They have darkness that waits, watches, and never lets go. I've always loved libraries. There's something comforting about the smell of old books, the quiet, and the sense that every corner holds a story waiting to be discovered. I worked part-time at a small city library, and for years it was a peaceful, almost meditative experience. That peace ended abruptly when a stranger began appearing during my shifts. Someone who didn't check out books, didn't ask questions, and seemed to exist solely to watch. It started subtly. I first noticed him on a quiet evening when the library was nearly empty. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and his face was obscured by shadows. At first, I assumed he was a new patron browsing quietly. But as the night wore on, I realized he wasn't moving between shelves or reading any books. He simply stood, somewhere in the periphery, staring in my direction. His presence was unsettling, yet I couldn't quite describe why. Over the next few days, he appeared again and again, always during my shifts, always silent and always watching. I tried to ignore him, assuming he was a recluse or a lost visitor. But then strange things began to happen. Books I had just shelved that would be scattered across the floor. My notes and paperwork disappeared, only to be found in different areas of the library. The sense of being watched intensified. Whenever I turned around, he would vanish. only to reappear moments later in a place I hadn't noticed before. One night, I stayed late to catalogue new arrivals. The library was empty except for the sound of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the building. I was startled when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and echoing through the silent halls. I turned quickly, but no one was there. The footsteps continued circling the stacks, moving in ways that defied logic. It was as though someone, or something, was following me, staying just out of sight. I began noticing small, chilling details. A handprint on a glass window, smudged and pale. Pages of books marked with words I hadn't written. "Leave now. We see you. You're next." The stranger's presence became more pronounced, and I realized he wasn't just a silent observer. He was actively influencing the space around me. Objects would move, doors would creak open, lights would flicker, all in response to his unseen presence. One night, desperate to confront him, I called out, "Who's there?" My voice echoed through the library, but there was no answer. Then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, coming from the farthest corner of the library. "You shouldn't be here alone." I froze, my blood running cold. Slowly, I moved toward the source, only to find the corner empty. The air grew cold, almost freezing, and I could see my breath fogging in the dim light. Something was definitely in the building with me, and it was aware of my fear. Over the following weeks, the incidents escalated. Books would fall from shelves without explanation. Chairs would topple over. Computer monitors displayed messages in text I hadn't typed. "We are always watching. You can't leave." I started documenting everything, taking photos and notes. The stranger never appeared directly in any images, yet his presence was unmistakable. Shadows moved independently of the lighting, stretching unnaturally across the walls and floors. One evening, a co-worker stayed late with me. We were discussing an upcoming library event when the lights flickered violently, plunging us into near darkness. In the brief flashes of illumination, we both saw him. A tall figure, face obscured, standing between the shelves. My co-worker froze, pale and trembling. Before we could react, he vanished. When the lights stabilized, everything appeared normal again, as if nothing had happened. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him standing in the corner of my room, waiting silently, watching. I began hearing whispers in the library, even when I wasn't there. Recordings of my own voice, calling my name, mocking me. The fear became overwhelming. I realized the stranger wasn't just haunting the library. He was following me, crossing the boundaries of the building, infecting my life with terror. One night I stayed until closing, determined to end the nightmare. I walked through the library, calling out, demanding that he reveal himself. The air grew thick, and the lights dimmed until I could barely see. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, and I felt a hand brush against my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. The whispers turned into laughter, hollow and echoing, filling every corner of the building. I bolted for the exit, my heart hammering in my chest. I reported the incidents to management, but they dismissed it as stress or imagination. They didn't see the figure, didn't hear the whispers, didn't feel the cold presence that had haunted me. I felt isolated, trapped in a nightmare that no one else could understand. Desperate, I sought the help of paranormal experts. They confirmed that the library was experiencing intense supernatural activity, focused on me specifically. The stranger was a malevolent entity, intelligent and patient, feeding on fear and attention. Even after leaving the night shifts, the terror followed me. I would wake in the middle of the night, feeling his presence looming near my bed. Shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally, and whispers echoed softly in empty rooms. The library, once a place of peace and knowledge, had become a conduit for something dark and eternal. Years later, I returned briefly to the library, hoping to face my fears. The building was quiet, filled with the familiar scent of books and polished wood. But in the corner of my eye, I saw him, still watching, still waiting. I knew then that some horrors aren't contained by walls or time. Some presences linger, patient and calculating, waiting for the next moment to strike. Horror doesn't always announce itself with loud noises or obvious threats. Sometimes it sits silently, watching, feeding on fear and haunting the spaces we think we know. The stranger in the library wasn't just a ghost or a shadow. It was something far more intelligent, something that thrived on terror, something that never truly leaves. Even now, whenever I walk past quiet libraries, I feel the same chill, the same unshakable dread. I know deep down that the stranger is still out there, waiting for someone else to wander alone, for someone else to become the next victim of a horror that exists just beyond the edge of sight. I'd taken a part-time job as a night janitor at an old hospital on the outskirts of the city. The building had been abandoned for years, though some parts were still in use for storage and medical research. I thought it would be an easy gig, quiet, low pressure, and mostly solitary. But the night I started, I realized that some places are haunted not just by memories, but by something far darker. The hospital had a strange energy from the moment I stepped inside. The halls were dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering occasionally, casting long, twisted shadows across the peeling walls. I thought it was just old wiring, but the way the shadows moved unnaturally made me uneasy. My first few nights were uneventful, though the building groaned and creaked as if it were alive. I told myself it was just the building settling, a harmless explanation. Then I started noticing things that couldn't be explained. Doors I had locked would be open the next morning. Equipment would be moved or missing, only to reappear in odd places. Footsteps echoed behind me, though I was always alone in the halls. At first, I tried to rationalize everything. Old buildings make noises. Drafts can move objects. But the feeling of being watched was impossible to ignore. One night, while mopping the floors of the abandoned wing, I saw him for the first time. A figure at the end of the hallway. He was tall, thin, dressed in what looked like an old janitor's uniform. At first, I thought it was another employee, but as I approached, the figure vanished. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath fogged in the icy air. I realized then that I was dealing with something not human. Over the following weeks, the activity escalated. I would see fleeting glimpses of the figure, always at the edge of my vision. The lights would flicker violently when he appeared, and sometimes the shadows in the hallways seemed to stretch toward me. I began hearing whispers, low, guttural, calling my name, sometimes repeating the words, "Stay, clean, forever." I could feel a presence following me, watching me, and I dreaded every step I took. One particularly terrifying night, I entered the old operating theater to clean. The room was filled with dust, the smell of disinfectant lingering despite the years. As I moved the mop, I noticed a shadow on the wall, separate from my own. It began to stretch, twisting unnaturally, forming a shape that resembled the figure I had been seeing. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, except for a faint glow from the emergency exit signs. That's when I heard it. The sound of someone dragging a metal bucket across the floor, slow, deliberate, and echoing off the walls. I ran, but the sound followed me, growing louder, faster, as if the figure was keeping pace with me. When I reached the main hall, I saw him again, standing silently, his hollow eyes fixed on me. I froze, unable to look away, as a whisper slithered into my ear, "You belong here now." My heart pounded, my hands shook, and I finally bolted toward the exit. Even after escaping the hospital, the terror didn't end. I began seeing the figure in my dreams, always standing silently in the shadows, always watching, always waiting. Objects in my apartment would move inexplicably. I would hear the drag of a bucket across the floor, soft and deliberate, at the exact moment I tried to sleep. The hospital had followed me, or at least the entity within it had. I tried speaking to colleagues, but no one believed me. The hospital was old, they said, and probably just creaked in unusual ways. But I knew the truth. The janitor I saw was not human. He was a malevolent spirit, tied to the building, thriving on fear, and now aware of me. Every night I worked, I had become part of his ritual, and he had not let go. The last night I worked there, I tried to leave as early as possible, packing up my supplies and heading for the exit. As I reached the lobby, the figure appeared in the reflection of the glass doors. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and I felt a cold wave sweep through me. I ran without looking back. That was the last time I ever entered that building. Years later, I still hear the drag of the bucket in the dead of night. Shadows in my apartment stretch unnaturally. Whispers follow me wherever I go, and I know that the janitor is still out there, still waiting, still hungry for fear. I warn anyone considering a night job in an abandoned building. Some places are alive, and some spirits are patient. They wait, they watch, and when you're alone, they strike. Horror doesn't always manifest as violence or screams. Sometimes it's subtle, the feeling of being watched, the chill in the air, the faint sound of dragging metal. And sometimes it's all tied to a single entity, a presence that will haunt you long after you think you've escaped. The Midnight Janitor isn't just a story, it's a warning. Some places are never truly empty, and some spirits never forget. I had always enjoyed traveling for work, and I prided myself on finding interesting, off-the-beaten-path hotels. One evening, while on a business trip to a small town, I booked a room in a century-old hotel with ornate architecture and a reputation for charm. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The staff were polite, the lobby welcoming, and the room clean. But I would soon discover that appearances can be dangerously deceptive. The hotel had a peculiar layout, with narrow hallways and numerous locked doors that seemed oddly out of place. My room was at the end of a long corridor on the 4th floor. Initially, I didn't notice anything unusual, but that first night I was awakened by a faint knocking. It was soft, deliberate, and came from the wall adjacent to my bed. I assumed it was a neighboring guest or a maintenance issue, but the knocking continued throughout the night, always in the same pattern. The next morning I mentioned it to the front desk. The receptionist smiled and said the walls were thin, and some guests were known to make noise. I accepted the explanation, though a sense of unease lingered. That afternoon, as I explored the hotel, I noticed a door on my floor that was locked from the outside. There was no signage, no room number, nothing. It seemed to exist only for itself. Something about it drew my attention, a silent pull that I couldn't explain. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the wall and, to my horror, heard faint breathing and muffled whispers. The voice was low and garbled, repeating a single word over and over, "Help! Help! Help!" My heart raced. I pulled away and tried to convince myself it was a trick of the building settling, but the sound felt real, alive, desperate. The following days were worse. Objects in my room shifted inexplicably. Shadows seemed to move independently of the lights, and the knocking became rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I started hearing footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth, though no one was ever visible. Sleep became impossible. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, staring at the blank walls, waiting for something to emerge. One evening, unable to resist any longer, I asked the night clerk about the locked door. His expression changed immediately, a shadow crossing his face. He leaned closer and whispered, "No one goes in there." Ever. That room, it's not for guests. When I pressed for more, he shook his head. It's been sealed for decades. Some things inside, they shouldn't be disturbed. That night, the knocking was relentless. I could hear scratching, faint but growing, as if someone or something was clawing at the walls. The whispers became clear. "Let me out. Help me. Don't leave me." Panic surged through me. I felt a cold pressure against the back of my neck, a chill that seeped into my bones. I ran to the door and tried to lock it, but it felt as though invisible hands were holding it open, testing my resolve, daring me to stay. The next morning, I decided I had to leave. I packed quickly and checked out, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. But as I walked down the hall toward the elevator, I glimpsed the locked door slightly ajar, even though the staff had assured me it was sealed. A shadow moved behind it, and I could swear I heard a faint whisper. "Come back. Stay with me." I didn't stop. I ran out of the hotel, my keys clutched tightly in my hand, heart hammering. Even after returning home, the memories haunted me. I would dream of that locked room, the knocking, the whispers pleading for release. At night, I sometimes hear faint tapping on the walls of my apartment, the rhythm eerily familiar, like a heartbeat in sync with my own. I cannot shake the feeling that whatever resides in that hotel room followed me, tethered by fear, curiosity, and the unwillingness to leave it alone. I later researched the hotel's history. The locked room had once belonged to a guest who disappeared without a trace nearly a century ago. Maintenance staff over the years reported strange noises, cold drafts, and shadows that moved independently. Some claimed to hear whispers and scratching behind the walls. The room was sealed permanently, but the energy inside, it seemed, never left. Horror isn't always immediate or violent. Sometimes it's subtle. The sound of knocking, the brush of cold air, a shadow that doesn't belong. And sometimes curiosity is dangerous. That locked room in the hotel wasn't just haunted. It was a trap, a pocket of malevolence waiting for someone foolish enough to notice it, foolish enough to listen to its whispers. Even now, years later, I cannot walk past that town without a shiver. I know that room still exists, still locked, still pulsing with a presence that watches, waits, and feeds. And I know that some curiosities are better left untouched, some doors better left unopened, and some horrors better left unexplored. I'd always considered myself lucky to find a cheap apartment in the city. It was a small, two-bedroom unit on the top floor of an aging building with creaky stairs and peeling paint. But it was affordable, and that's all I needed. My landlord informed me that I'd have a roommate moving in soon, a young man named Kyle. He seemed normal over text, polite, and eager to move in. I had no idea that my life was about to turn into a waking nightmare. Kyle moved in one rainy evening. He was quiet, reserved, and polite enough, but there was something off about him. He rarely spoke unless necessary, and he seemed to always appear where I least expected him, standing silently in the corner of a room or peering out the window. I initially dismissed it as shyness or awkwardness, but the feeling of being watched began to grow. The first night he stayed, I heard noises coming from his room. It sounded like whispering, but muffled, almost unintelligible. I knocked on his door, asking if he was okay. He smiled faintly and said he was fine, but there was a hollow tone to his voice that made my skin crawl. I chalked it up to moving stress and tried to ignore it. Over the next few days, things escalated. Personal items started disappearing. My keys, my wallet, small items I couldn't explain. I would find them in strange places, under the couch, in the refrigerator, or on the windowsill. Kyle never seemed to notice, never apologized, but there was always that faint, knowing smile. I started feeling unsafe in my own apartment. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching from his room. At first, I thought it was a rodent, but the sound was rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was clawing at the walls. I approached the door slowly, and to my horror, the door swung open by itself. The room was empty. No furniture, no bed, no sign of Kyle at all, but the scratches continued. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the whispers started, repeating my name over and over in a low, guttural voice. "You can't leave, you can't leave." I tried to speak to the landlord, but he claimed that Kyle had just moved in and that I was imagining things. When I asked neighbors, some mentioned that the previous tenants had complained about strange occurrences, items disappearing, noises at night, shadows in the corners. Some even said that roommates had vanished without explanation. My stomach dropped. Then, one morning, Kyle was gone. His bed was neatly made, his belongings packed, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't truly left. The apartment felt heavier, darker, as if a presence lingered, watching me. I began seeing glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye, standing silently in the hallway, reflected in mirrors, always staring. The whispers returned at night, louder, more insistent. "Stay. Stay with us." I tried to move out, but every time I packed my things, something prevented me. My car wouldn't start, my bags would vanish, and I would see shadowy shapes blocking the doorways. It became clear that this was no ordinary haunting. Kyle was not human, or perhaps he was something more sinister that could occupy the physical space of the apartment. One evening, I confronted the presence. I stood in the middle of the apartment, shouting, demanding it leave. The shadows moved, converging in the center of the room, forming a shape that resembled Kyle, tall and indistinct. The temperature dropped sharply, and a whisper slithered into my ear. "You belong here now." Panic overtook me, and I fled the apartment, leaving nearly everything behind. Even after relocating, the terror followed. I would wake at night, convinced I saw him in my bedroom doorway. Shadows in my apartment stretched unnaturally, always at the edge of my vision. The whispers, faint but persistent, reminded me that some presences never truly leave. I realized that Kyle, or what he really was tethered to me now, a dark companion that thrived on fear and observation. Months later, I researched the building. I discovered that it had a long history of tenants disappearing mysteriously. Some were never found, while others were forced to leave abruptly, often describing the same adult silent roommate. I realized with horror that I wasn't the first, nor would I be the last. The building seemed to have a way of consuming people, manifesting them as something else, something that could stalk the next unsuspecting tenant. Horror isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind normalcy, in quiet corners of an apartment, in roommates who are too quiet, too watchful. Some entities don't announce themselves. They wait, they observe, and they consume your sense of safety, piece by piece. Kyle was a predator in human form, patient, relentless, and utterly unknowable. Even now, years later, I can feel the weight of that apartment pressing down on me. Shadows seem deeper, whispers seem louder in empty rooms, and I fear that wherever I go, a part of that presence remains with me. Some horrors don't stay confined to walls. They follow, tethered to those who survived long enough to witness them. I learned the hard way that not all roommates are human, and some never truly leave. I had been working late nights at a downtown office building for weeks, and I thought I was accustomed to the quiet, empty corridors after hours. But one evening, something happened that I can never forget. Something that made me realize that some buildings have secrets they don't want anyone to uncover. It started when I finished work later than usual. I took the elevator to leave, as I had countless times before. But this time, as I pressed the button for the ground floor, an elevator car appeared that I had never seen before. Its doors were black, without markings, and the interior was dimly lit with a flickering yellow light. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The doors closed silently behind me, and the elevator lurched downward with an unnatural speed. At first, I thought it was just an old building and faulty mechanics, but then I noticed something strange. The numbers on the display didn't correspond to any floor in the building. The elevator descended past levels that should not exist. -1, -2, then numbers I had never seen, rooms or levels that weren't on any map. A cold draft filled the elevator, and I shivered. The light flickered violently, and I felt a heavy presence behind me, though no one was there. Suddenly, the doors opened, revealing a floor unlike anything I had ever seen. The walls were covered in old peeling wallpaper, the lights were dim and orange, and the air smelled of decay. In the distance, I saw shadows moving, and I heard faint whispers, voices calling my name softly, almost coaxing me forward. My instincts screamed to leave, but the doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. As I explored the floor, the whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from one direction, but all around me, echoing through the endless corridors. Some were pleading, some were threatening, all of them chilling. The floor seemed to stretch infinitely. Hallways looped back on themselves, and doors led to rooms that changed every time I passed them. The sense of being watched was suffocating. I tried the elevator again, pressing the button to return to the ground floor, but it no longer responded. Instead, I felt a subtle vibration beneath my feet, as if the building itself was alive, aware of my presence and determined to keep me there. Shadows began to coalesce into forms, figures without faces, tall and thin, moving in the corners of my vision. Each step I took felt heavier, as though the floor was trying to pull me down. Hours, or maybe days, seemed to pass. Time was meaningless on this floor. I found rooms with furniture covered in dust, mirrors that reflected not my face, but dark, twisted versions of myself, and doors that whispered secrets I couldn't comprehend. The more I explored, the more I realized that this elevator, this floor, existed outside normal reality. It was a liminal space, a trap for anyone who wandered too late, and it was alive in a malevolent way. I eventually discovered other trapped people, shadows of former employees who had taken the elevator late at night. They moved silently, staring at me with empty eyes, their forms flickering like old television images. Some whispered warnings, others screamed silently. They were reminders of the fate awaiting anyone who stayed too long. The presence behind them, the thing controlling the floor, seemed to feed on fear, despair, and the desperation to escape. In a moment of sheer terror, I ran back to the elevator. The doors opened as if inviting me in, and I stumbled inside. The descent was slower this time, but I could feel the presence following, pressing down from all sides. When the doors finally opened to the lobby, everything was normal, or at least it appeared normal. The building was empty, lights working, and no trace of the elevator anomaly remained. I left immediately, vowing never to return. But the memory of that floor, those whispers, and the faceless figures haunted me for months. I began to notice subtle signs in other buildings, elevators that didn't stop where they should, hallways that seemed longer than they were, shadows that didn't behave naturally. The experience had opened my awareness to something terrifying. Some structures are alive. Some floors exist between worlds, and some elevators lead not just to another level, but to another reality entirely. Even years later, I can't step into an elevator without fear. The memory of that black, flickering car and the infinite floor beneath it remains vivid. Horror doesn't always manifest in obvious forms. Sometimes it hides in ordinary places, like an elevator, waiting for the curious, the late-night wanderer, or the unsuspecting employee. And sometimes it's patient, waiting for the next person to step inside, unaware that they are entering a space that should never exist. The building still stands downtown, bustling during the day, normal in every way. But I know the truth. That elevator, that hidden floor, and the presence within it are real, and I know that somewhere it waits for the next person curious enough or foolish enough to step inside and be consumed by its darkness. I'd always thought my office was just another place to work, a mundane, repetitive environment where deadlines and emails were the only threats. But then a new employee, Jared, joined my team, and everything changed. From the first day, I sensed something off about him. His smile was too wide, his eyes too sharp, and his gaze lingered far too long. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just first-day nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, studying me. Initially, Jared acted helpful, offering advice and support on projects. But the helpfulness quickly turned invasive. He would appear at my desk unexpectedly, hovering silently while I typed or lean over my shoulder, making casual comments that felt threatening rather than friendly. I started noticing small things. Files moved on my computer, emails I hadn't sent appearing in my outbox, and personal items in my office rearranged. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The real nightmare began one evening when I stayed late to finish a report. I heard his footsteps echoing in the otherwise empty office, slow and deliberate. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, grinning, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Working late again?" he asked casually, though his tone carried an unspoken warning. I ignored him and returned to my work, but the feeling of being watched never left. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. My computer files were corrupted or deleted. My office supplies vanished, and strange notes appeared on my desk. Cryptic messages like, "I see you can't hide," and "soon." The rest of the office seemed oblivious. No one else noticed Jared's behavior. I began documenting everything, but the sense of dread continued to grow. He was everywhere, yet nowhere, and it was clear he enjoyed my fear. One night, while staying late again, I heard whispering behind me. I turned, expecting to see Jared, but the office was empty. Then my computer screen flickered, and a file I'd been working on opened by itself. Text appeared, typed out as if by invisible hands. "You can't escape the office." My heart raced, my palms sweated, and I realized that this wasn't just about office politics. It had become something much darker, something supernatural. The presence of Jared, or whatever he had become, grew more oppressive. Doors that were previously open would slam shut behind me. Lights flickered and went out, plunging the office into darkness. Shadows seemed to stretch and move independently, following me as I navigated the cubicles. I could hear whispers from every corner, calling my name, warning me, taunting me. The building itself seemed to be complicit, aiding him in his torment. Eventually, I tried to confront him directly. I demanded answers, asked him to leave me alone, and even threatened to report him. But his grin widened and his voice was calm, almost amused. "You can't get rid of me. I'm part of this place now." At that moment, I realized that Jared wasn't just a difficult coworker. He was something else entirely, a dark presence tethered to the office, feeding on fear and stress. I attempted to escape the building, but every exit seemed blocked, every hallway endless. The office transformed into a maze, shifting and warping as though it were alive. Cubicles twisted, doors led to rooms that shouldn't exist, and the fluorescent lights hummed ominously. Jared appeared in multiple locations at once, always watching, always waiting. My mind began to fracture under the relentless pressure of his attention and the building's unnatural energy. Weeks passed, or maybe days. I lost track of time. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, unable to leave the office or escape Jared's influence. Even when I thought I had exited, I found myself back inside, wandering familiar yet alien corridors. The whispers continued, the shadows lingered, and Jared's grin never faded. He was patient, relentless, and utterly inhuman. Finally, I decided to take extreme measures. I contacted security, HR, and even local authorities, but the office appeared normal to everyone else. The files on my computer, the notes, the shadows, the whispers, all vanished. Jared's presence was gone, or at least hidden. I knew, however, that this wasn't the end. Some horrors don't need physical form. They wait, invisible and patient, ready to strike the next time fear allows them. Even now, I can't step into an office building without a shiver. I feel eyes on me, shadows stretching where they shouldn't, whispers trailing my every step. Jared taught me that horror isn't confined to haunted houses or abandoned buildings. Sometimes it's a coworker, someone who integrates into your world, feeding on your fear, turning your daily life into a nightmare. Horror can be subtle, insidious, and patient. It waits in fluorescent-lit corridors, behind office doors, and in the cubicles of mundane workplaces. And sometimes it finds its perfect host, blending into normal life while consuming sanity one late night at a time.